Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be diving deep into another brand new dry yeast from WHC Labs, which has been designed to impart specific fruit flavour into your beer. So it's Pineapple Passion, perfect for your hazy IPAs and tropical inspired beers. In this video, we're going to be breaking down the specifications for the yeast, looking at a beer I've brewed with it to see whether it is in fact imparting those flavours that are promised, and talking about how best to utilise it in your beers and where we can get the most out of this yeast in terms of expressing that pineapple character. So let's start with the basics. Pineapple Passion is another specialised yeast from WHC Labs, similar to Mango Madness, which I've reviewed on a previous video. This isolate has been selected specifically for delivering the pineapple aromas and flavours which you would expect given the name of this yeast, along with rapid fermentation and high attenuation characteristics. Obviously, the main target for this type of yeast is going to be your hazy IPAs and New England IPAs, that sort of thing. But we will talk a little bit about the potential versatility of this yeast later on in the video. So here's a quick rundown of the specs for this particular yeast strain. Starting off with your fermentation temperature, WHC have specified between 22 and 26 degrees for the ideal fermentation range for Pineapple Passion. It can ferment much higher than that due to its thermo-tolerant heritage that it has. But this specific range has been given because that is where WHC have found it to produce the most prominent pineapple aromas and flavours in the finished beer. Attenuation with this yeast is going to be high, so expect under normal mashing conditions that you'll be looking at between 76 and 80% attenuation, although we'll see later that this yeast can actually respond to mash temperatures and push that attenuation level down quite significantly if you want to. But generally expect it to produce a fairly well attenuated and dry beer that's going to let those fruit flavours really sort of sparkle on the finished product. The stated flocculation for this strain is medium, and according to WHC it does have good haze stability as well. So again, with the kind of target audience of, or target market for hazy beers, that's obviously going to be a positive benefit in most cases. There is also the potential with Pineapple Passion for significant biotransformation. So again, with these sorts of styles of beer, if you're wanting to dry hop during active fermentation and get more expression from the hops due to biotransformation, this is a good potential option for you. So obviously I had to give this yeast a proper road test with one of my own beers. I was lucky enough to get a pre-release sample of it from the fantastic team over at the Malt Miller. So shout out to those guys for that, and make sure if you are planning on picking up some of these that you get over to the Malt Miller to source that. I will put a link for that in the description. We've also done an episode over at the Hop Edition podcast specifically based around this yeast and 4 beers that we all brewed using the same strain, which we tasted and compared. And we got a couple of guests from WHC Labs on the podcast to help us out with that. So get over there either via the website or your usual podcasting platforms. Again, link in the description to get even more expert insight into this yeast and learn a little bit more detail about the technical background to how this yeast is produced and where WHC recommend its usage and so on and so forth. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment in below, especially if you've actually used this yeast yourself and you've got any feedback, or if you've got any other questions based around the content of this video. So the beer I've brewed to test this yeast is based on my Road to Sonoma clone recipe, which you can see in the video linked above. I've just changed up the yeast, obviously, and the hop schedule to try and push that kind of pineapple character through the hop selection, as well as the esters and so on that are delivered by the yeast itself. You can see the full recipe in the brew file, the link which is included in the description, and I'll also put a summary of it up on the screen now. And if you go over to the Malt Miller, again another link in the description for this, you can actually buy this beer in kit form along with some of the other beers that were featured in the Hop Edition podcast based around this yeast. So if you go and have a listen to that, you can hear about those different beers and choose whichever recipe you think would be most up your street. As far as my experience with this yeast in terms of the actual brewing process, it absolutely smashed through the wort in about 2 to 3 days. It's not the highest gravity beer. It's a sort of session strength hazy pale ale, but even so, fermentation was done super quickly and it was well underway within just a few hours. So that is something to bear in mind if you are looking to utilize the kind of biotransformation properties of this yeast with your dry hops. You might want to consider adding those dry hops for active fermentation almost immediately after you've pitched the yeast, or even at the same time as you are pitching the yeast, because you will see this particular strain kicking off within hours. So if you leave it until the next day or two, most of that fermentation may have taken place already. I fermented this beer at 24 degrees, which was right in the middle of the suggested temperature range, and I didn't use any pressure during fermentation, just in case that suppressed any of the esters produced by this yeast. The beer was kegged within a week, and based on my early tastings of it, there's really not a huge amount of maturation time needed with this yeast as well. So not only will it ferment the beer out super quickly, but your general turnaround time in terms of conditioning and so on can be really quick with this strain as well. As I mentioned previously, I did actually use a very high mash temperature for this beer, again following the kind of track brewing method for Sonoma. So I mashed at 72 degrees, and doing that I was actually able to push the attenuation level down to about 65%. So I ended up with a final gravity about 1017. So even though it is a high attenuating yeast and the given attenuation rate is between 76 and 80, it will respond to higher mash temperatures, and you can leave a little bit of residual sweetness and body in the beer by doing that. So let's get into the beer itself. Here we have it in the glass. It's looking really good. Really pleased with the colour on this and the level of haziness that it's come out with. It does seem to be maintaining that. So yeah, haze stability does seem to be working quite well with this particular yeast. It's got a nice frothy white head on the top of it, good head retention, and yeah, it kind of looks like the base recipe that I used for this in terms of appearance wise, looking quite similar to Sonoma from Track Brewing. The ABV came out at 4.2%, so it was a little bit above the target for that. So normally that would be a 3.8% beer, but again, given the high attenuation of the yeast, despite the high mash temperature, it still pushed it up a little bit higher than expected for that, but it's still a nice sessionable 4.2%. So yeah, really happy with the appearance. In terms of the aroma, you do get a real nice strong punch of fresh kind of cut pineapple on the nose. There's some other light sort of citrusy aromas in there. It's a bit of more of a fresh kind of pineapple. So like I said, kind of freshly cut pineapple, as opposed to really sweet, kind of juicy or pineapple sort of flavored sweets, that kind of thing. So it's got a very, fresh kind of tropical fruit aromatic on the nose. Really pleasant. Nice bit of malt sweetness, I think, in there as well, just to back that up. It's difficult to judge, obviously, what is produced in terms of where the aroma is coming from in terms of yeast esters and what is coming off of the hopping schedule. I'm not sure really how anyone does separate that in these kinds of beers, but it certainly seems to have steered this particular beer towards pineapple kind of dominant aroma. It does have a general sort of soft kind of tropical fruit note to it, but for me, the main thing that I'm getting there is pineapple. So it's kind of mission accomplished there in terms of the aroma that we're getting for this beer. So what about the flavour? Again, definitely delivering on the pineapple. Maybe it's not quite as obvious flavour wise as it is on the aroma, but there's still definitely this nice, sweet, fresh kind of pineapple taste there. There's a little bit, just a touch of kind of tartness to it. Not in terms of being sour, but it's just got that, again, I'll come back to the kind of like freshly cut pineapple. So maybe not fully like overripe pineapple or really sweet pineapple. It's got a little bit more of a tart kind of pineapple edge to it. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of a fresh pineapple, a general kind of sweet tropical note in there. There's maybe some soft stone fruit flavour on it as well, a little bit of malt sweetness. That slight kind of tartness there makes it very drinkable, has almost like a drying finish to it, even though the body on it is quite full. So it's still got the full body from that higher final gravity. Really nice mouthfeel. And yeah, it's really nice, to be honest. Just enjoying that very much. Pineapple flavour is there. It's definitely coming through as far as what I assume is coming from the yeast and the hops in combination with that. So I think it's definitely done the job. It could maybe be a little bit more prominent in terms of the flavour as far as pineapple goes for me, but I've kind of got a feeling that maybe that's more down to the hops. So I think that Brew 1 is perhaps a little bit underwhelming if it's the main feature hop. I think you need a lot of that to really get it to kind of punch out that pineapple flavour. So I might, if I was to rebrew this, perhaps go with something a little bit more pineapple forward, or a little bit more of an aggressive pineapple flavour. So things like your kind of Vic Secret, maybe a Zaka, although a Zaka is quite a gentle hop as well in the same way as Brew 1, but or maybe combining a couple of those hops together to really push that pineapple flavour through as well. But that said, again, this is really nice, really enjoying it, and really happy with the result I've got using this particular yeast. So yeah, happy with how this recipe has worked out. I think this is a great starting point for experimenting with this particular yeast strain. It's definitely bringing forward the pineapple kind of aromas and flavours in this beer. And I think there's potentially the opportunity with yeast like this and Mango Madness to actually reduce the amount of dry hops that you're using, or hops in the whirlpool, because there is quite a lot of character being brought by the yeast itself. So potentially it could be, in some sense, a kind of money-saving device where you don't need to actually use quite such an extreme hopping rate for some of these beers. And also with this really fast turnaround time that you can get, it's got quite a few positives there, which is going to, I think, make it quite popular, not just with homebrewers, but probably in the commercial market as well. So looking forward to seeing what other people do with this. We had some great beers on the podcast with this particular strain, and yeah, it seemed to consistently produce that kind of pineapple note, although in slightly differing ways with the different styles of beers that we brewed. So it's definitely getting a recommend from me, and I think you should go and check this out and try it if you're into brewing these types of beers yourself. So let's just talk a little bit more about hop choices for this. So in this particular beer, I went with Brew 1, Eldorado and Citra as the trio of hops that I was using. Brew 1 being the main kind of pineapple forward hop out of those three that I chose specifically to try and push that flavour, and the Eldorado and the Citra as a sort of baseline kind of tropical fruit flavoured hops for the hot side to kind of build those layers of flavour and support the Brew 1. There's other varieties, as I've alluded to already, in terms of hops that can really push pineapple flavour. So I'm just going to talk through a few of those now. So first up, again, the reason I chose Brew 1 is because that is one of the main hops that comes to mind for me. The other one, which I typically think of, would be Azaka. So Azaka and Brew 1, probably the two ones that I immediately think of when I think I want to get some pineapple flavour into a beer from the hops. Both of them are fairly gentle, though, in terms of the flavour impact, the flavour intensity from them. So if you are going to use those in your beer for pineapple flavours, I would say make sure that you are being fairly generous in terms of the hopping rate which you are using for those. They're not as impactful as something like a Mosaic or a Nelson Sauvin or Citra even. So bear that in mind. Next on the list, and this one is certainly a little bit more aggressive in terms of the prominence of the flavour from it, and that is Vic Secret. So it's an Australian hop which is very much, for me, dominated by kind of pineapple flavour, and it's a really punchy kind of bright, and again, it's a little bit of a sort of tart pineapple flavour for me, almost like a sort of spiky bitterness to it as well because of the high alpha nature of those hops. So that is a good option. There's some additional kind of grassy and herbal notes that you might get in there with that particular hop, as well as the kind of pineapple and general tropical fruit flavors like passion fruit and so on. It is very high alpha, so do be cautious with it. As with kind of most of the Australian hops nowadays, I would personally avoid using it as a hot side addition and stick to having it as a portion of the dry hop, and maybe even not make it the main dry hop for me. In my experience, there's obviously your mileage might vary on that one. Next on the list, I've got Idaho 7. Maybe not necessarily one that you would immediately associate with pineapple flavor specifically, but I think it's a really great supporting hop to kind of bring that flavor and aroma out with other pineapple themed kind of hops. So if you were doing Idaho 7 as a mixture with something like a Vic Secret or your Azacas and Brew ones, I think you're potentially going to really amp up that kind of juicy tropical fruit flavor. And Idaho 7 is well known for being very high in survivable compounds, so a good option to maybe put into your whirlpool or late hot side additions to support maybe dry hopping with something like an Azacca or Vic Secret, for example. Next up, we've got El Dorado, which is one that I actually used in this particular beer. It's not one that I think personally I get a lot of pineapple flavor through on its own, although pineapple is given as a descriptor for this hop in a lot of sources that you'll see. So if you go online, you'll find a lot of places saying, yeah, pineapple flavored. For me personally, I've always got more of a sweet kind of watermelon candy kind of flavor from it on its own, but mixed in with, again, other hops that do bring that kind of pineapple flavor. I think that's a really good kind of base flavor to bring that kind of sweet tropical note in and help to emphasize pineapple flavors from other hops. And maybe in combination, then perhaps you can bring out a little bit more of that pineapple character from the El Dorado itself. Last on the list, we've got Sabro. And again, this one really doesn't deliver pineapple flavor individually, I would say, but the kind of coconut and woody herbal flavors that you can get from this particular variety are something that when you pair it up with pineapple flavored hops can then steer it more into that kind of like pina colada kind of cocktail, and those can be very complementary flavors to the taste of pineapple. So it's definitely one that is worth considering, again, as a kind of supporting hop for the more pineapple forward hops that you might be leading the kind of hop schedule with. So that one's worth looking into. Let me know if you've got any thoughts in terms of other hop varieties that can bring some pineapple flavor, or combinations of those hops that will really help to emphasize pineapple aroma and flavor in your beers. If you want to find something that's going to really combine well with a yeast like this, which is aimed at bringing those particular flavors out. So on the evidence of this beer, I would say that Pineapple Passion is definitely a good candidate for using in your kind of hazy pale ales and IPAs for sure. I did mention previously trying some other beers on the Hop Edition. When we were selecting the beers we were going to brew, we tried to do a range of different styles, and I'm happy to say that the yeast actually produced some really excellent beers in the style of West Coast IPA and even a kind of pseudo IPL as well. So WHC themselves have said it's very much geared towards this kind of style of beer, but I think it's worth experimenting with it for some of these other types of beer where you just maybe want to add something a little bit novel to it in terms of the flavor profile, as far as obviously bringing out kind of pineapple aromatics and flavors in there. That apparent versatility for the yeast did get me thinking about other options that you could use it for. There's maybe the potential to kind of co-pitch this yeast with other strains and then do some interesting styles that maybe you wouldn't think of immediately with the yeast on its own. So for example, you know, I think pineapple could be something that could work quite well in saisons and other Belgian style pale ales. Perhaps you could obviously co-pitch with a yeast strain that was going to bring that other element to it. Again, bear in mind how rapidly this does ferment, so you might want to, if you are co-pitching, maybe pitch the Pineapple Passion in a little bit later than the primary strain, or in a smaller quantity, just to make sure that it doesn't just ferment everything out before the other strains even got going. I think for obvious reasons it could potentially be a good again co-pitch or primary strain for sort of fruity sour beers and mixed fermentation projects, that kind of thing as well. keeping it a little bit more simple, I think one thing that I would like to try with this yeast is to do an American wheat beer with it. I think that could be really interesting just to see that additional yeast character in that kind of style. And bearing in mind the amount of extra flavour that it brings into the beer, maybe some of the more lightly hop styles like golden ales or blonde ales, that kind of thing, could be quite interesting if you use something that's producing this level of fruity esters into it. So that's a wrap for the Pineapple Passion yeast from WHC Labs. If you are a big fan of tropical fruity flavours in your beers and a yeast that's going to help to blend those esters really well with your big kind of IPA hops and so on, then give this a go. It's a fantastic strain to experiment with, and I'm really happy with the result, not just of this beer, but of all the other beers that I've tasted so far, which have used this strain. So yeah, go and check it out on the links in the description, and let me know if you've got any other questions or thoughts in the comments. Cheers, everybody.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, you know, that or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.